I tell you what, this is the final word that Christ gives from the cross, and what a blessing it has been to share these words and to hear the power of preaching. And we're going to hear just that as Jesus gives this final word: Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. He really teaches us how in fact we ought to die. Bishop Isaias Merritt, Macedonia Church in Grovetown, is getting ready to tell us how in fact we ought to handle this last word of Christ.
Today I'm talking about the last word that Jesus, the last phrase he gave in Luke 23:46. It reads, "And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said thus, he gave up the ghost." As I accepted the task of speaking on this final word, I picked up these words thinking that this has to be an issue because it looks as if Jesus is plagiarizing, because I've seen these words before. As I studied the text, I looked back and found that in Psalms 31, the same words were said. And I was wondering, why would he say a word like this when it was said a long time before? Why would he use these words uttered by other folk in a time when he's transitioning from life to death? And it dawned on me as I thought about where I've seen other expressions of Christ, and I was reminded about John 1:1, where it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God." And later on, we see that that same Word became flesh. So I was able to conclude that Jesus was not plagiarizing, but rather he was being what he was. The Word is Jesus, and Jesus is the living Word. Therefore, anything that is in the Word, Jesus is now fulfilling as the Word. With this new way of thinking, I took a second to look at the text a second time, and after the darkness had been on the earth for 3 hours, after the sun had been dark, after the veil of the temple had been torn down the center, he then speaks these words. He says, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. It's really Jesus being himself, a rhema word, activating a word that had been given centuries before. How is he the living word in this particular setting? Because of who the word was going to. He was the word because Isaiah said that the word never goes out and come back void. Jesus had accomplished something here. He already said it is finished. Therefore, the word was returning back to God in a sense of completion. So Jesus was the finished word on the cross, returning back to the Father, the originator of the word in the beginning. He also was a word because of what and where he placed himself. He placed his spirit back in the hands of the very one who sent him in the first place. And I was wondering, well, why not go back to his face? Well, because if you go back to his face, that's worship. When Jesus went back to his hand, it was more about a work. That means that although the work was finished, the act of his work was not completely done. He had to still go into a borrowed tomb. He had to still get up early on Sunday morning. He had to still proclaim that all power was in his hand. And he had to still release the fact that the Holy Spirit would come into the church, to birth the church into the world. There's another element here that I want to highlight as I get ready to close, and that element is the word commend. And that word commend in the Greek, it actually means to entrust. Jesus entrusted himself into the only hand that would take him back to the place that he needed to be. I remember him proclaiming to Herod, he said, "No man can take my life. I lay it down." Therefore, he had to put what was important to him in a place where he could pick it back up again. And I believe that we all should take a lesson here, that we should trust in the Lord with all of our heart, leaning not to our own understanding, but in everything we do, acknowledge him, trust him, and let him handle your business. May God be a blessing to all of you.